Hi there, I'm John Underhill, and this is the Red Special Guitar Podcast. Hello everyone. Firstly, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, then welcome, and if you've tuned in before, well, thank you very much for coming back. And I just want to say a thank you to everyone who has listened to the podcast so far. Now, the first episode has been listened to 207 times at the time of making this recording, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me, and I want to thank you all for your support and for listening. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and you want to make sure you don't miss a new episode when it's uploaded, then please subscribe to the channel and make sure to check out the Facebook page and Instagram for discussion and behind-the-scenes shots from the podcast. This week, though, I'll be talking to another friend of mine, Jonathan Planner, who I caught up with a few weeks back. Now, we discussed Jonathan's own journey with music, from buying his first drum up until finally owning his own Red Special, where his forum handle Tog comes from, and owning Buddy Holly's Stratocaster. Or not. Good morning, Jonathan, or good afternoon. It is morning, so we'll say...
It is morning, yes.
Say hello and welcome to what is episode 2 of the brand new, shiny Red Special Guitar Podcast. The Rustins has no dents in it on this podcast just yet.
Hello, nice to see you.
Well, just for those listening in the coronavirus pandemic, we are actually talking via Zoom, so Jonathan has the unfortunate thing of seeing my ugly face whilst he talks to me.
We are both wearing masks though, so we're all right.
Yep, excellent. So today we've got Jonathan on because he is, I consider a good friend of mine in the Red Special community and a good friend of mine outside of that too. And two, he has a really extensive history with Queen. He has a couple of Red Special replicas, probably more than a couple. He's probably got some hidden away that he doesn't want his wife to know about. And he's smiling a bit too much now. So I thought we would start off. Jonathan, do you want to tell us about how you got into Queen and why the Red Special and what it means to you?
It started, I guess, many years ago. My oldest school friend from about age 4 got into Queen probably very early on. I would imagine certainly just at the end of the first album, if not start of the second album probably. And I can remember visiting his house and him playing me things like Seven Seas of Rye, and I was sort of interested. I hadn't really quite got into music at that point, and I liked it, and I thought, yeah, that's quite nice. But I wasn't really overwhelmed at that point by music generally, and my life was I was doing different things, I guess. And it was almost as if Queen kept popping up in my life without me really understanding why or where. Several other people also started to follow them around that sort of time. And I don't think it was until really I noticed Bohemian Rhapsody come out that I suddenly thought, like everybody at that point, it was omnipresent. It was in the charts for 9 years or whatever it was, and you couldn't avoid it. And so I was constantly hearing this song and constantly thinking this is quite an interesting creative band, and maybe I should sort of find out a little bit more. And then I still left it a little bit after that before I bought any albums. And then another very, very good friend of mine said, you've really got to hear this stuff, and started playing me tracks like Good Company, other tracks from The Night of the Opera. And that was the point I thought, I've really, I've got to rush out and buy an album and listen to this. And I suppose probably within about 10 weeks or so of doing that, I'd bought all the albums they'd got at that point, and I was completely obsessed with it. So we, as a group of kids at school and stuff, we were somewhat odd from the other guys, I guess. Everyone was into football and everything, and we were into this band that wasn't particularly popular at the time and wasn't particularly fashionable at the time. Everybody was doing other things, and as music crept on, it was punk and it was ska and all sorts of other bits and pieces, and we were still very much into Queen. There's a small group of us, and I think it wasn't until we got to about end of the 70s we started thinking about let's go and see them. And so we ended up booking a concert tickets to see them at Wembley in 1980. And it was a very, very emotional night, because it was the night after John Lennon had been shot. And so it was one of those gigs where people were extremely happy to be seeing Queen, but also still literally in shock. It was probably one of the biggest, I think that Freddie's dying and the Twin Towers are probably the biggest sort of news events that have shocked me in my time. And the whole crowd were in a complete sort of daze at that point. And then of course Queen came on and played Imagine, and they seemed to be in tears, and we were all in tears, and it was probably one of the most emotional nights I can remember. But we came out of that situation, and on the way home we all sort of looked at each other and just said, we have to form a band. We've got to do something. We just love this. This was just the most awesome night we've ever had.
At that point, were you aware of Brian's story with the guitar, or was
not
it
at
more
all
the overall sound?
No, not at all. At that point in time, I was more focused on Roger. I'd spent the entire night really just staring at Roger's kit and staring at Roger and just being amazed at how energetic and how full on he was. I'd recently bought, well, not really, I'd fairly recently bought the Live Killers double album, and so I was obsessed with listening to him at that point, and less so Brian right at that moment. And so that was where I kind of started thinking Queen was a band that I really was going to be following for the kind of the rest of my life, I suspect. And I was very, very keen on the whole band as such, in terms of how they created the songs and what they were doing. And we were trying to work out ways in which we could do something in a similar sort of vein. And the guys went away and said, well, we're going to go and buy guitars. And so that kind of left me in a situation of, right, well, I'm definitely going to have to buy the drum kit then, because I was the one who was obsessed with that. So I think we then set about doing some recording without instruments, as you all do at that age when you're all kids, you know, mother's pots and pans, and somebody bought an acoustic guitar which wasn't particularly good, but we managed to do some rough recordings with a bunch of tape recorders and put it all together. And then I was, okay, fine, well, I need to go and get some serious equipment. So I went off and spent all my money on a nice shiny snare drum that was up in the local music shop. Got it back.
You haven't changed much over the years.
No, I had 50 quid in my bank account, and I spent every single penny on this drum. And then I got it back home, and I realised I didn't have a stand or some drumsticks. So fundamental flaw there. So I then had to go and borrow some money from my mother and go back to the music shop rather sheepishly and said, yeah, you know that drum I bought? I kind of need this drumsticks as well. So I went and did that. And not long after that, my father agreed to help out and give me some money to buy a bass drum. So we shot off to London, and he had an old Jag at that point, and he was driving up and down Shaftesbury Avenue, dropping me off at various music shops, and everyone was saying, no, you can't have a drum kit, a drum on its own. You've got to go and buy the whole drum kit, and I didn't have any money to do that. And I walked into the last one, which happened to be Rose Morris. And at the top floor, they said, yeah, we've got behind a cupboard, we've got some old drums. We'll have a look and see what's in there. And lo and behold, as soon as they opened the door, there was this absolutely enormous silver sparkle bass drum, identical to what I'd seen Roger playing a few months before. Yeah. It was just like, it was that sort of awe-inspiring moment. You could hear the angels singing as I saw this thing out there, you know. So then I had to absolutely. Yeah. So I then had to struggle with this thing down Shaftesbury Avenue and try and get it into the car, which it wouldn't get in. It was too big to get in the doors. It was ridiculous. So we had to try and stick it in the boot and string the boot together and drive all the way back out to home again with this thing in the back. You know, and it sort of went from there. But it's not long after you start as a drummer, you suddenly realise you can't actually write a song on a drum kit. You need to, you know, if you want to be to write something, you've got to learn to do something else on a guitar. And so that was when I started thinking, you know, if we're going to be a band, we want to go and do some recording, we want to write our own stuff, I've got to do something, I've got to go and get myself a guitar. And obviously at that point I started focusing a little more on what Brian was doing, and then when you started to dip into it more, I realised how much of a standout guitarist he was from anybody else that was on the scene at that moment. I mean, there was, and I can remember literally thinking to myself, I don't understand how I didn't notice this before. Every other band, every other guitarist is just playing a song very basically. There's hardly any harmonies. And I realised the depth of the music. I really hadn't appreciated quite how, I like the smoke and the flare and the glamour and Freddie and all of the sort of bang and bluster of Queen, but I hadn't really appreciated until that point just how musical they were. And it gave me a whole new perspective on music. It gave me I was completely obsessed with how he constructed the chords and the harmonies and how he got the sounds out of the guitar. I still at this point didn't know it wasn't a guitar that he'd just gone into buy in a shop. I had no clue about the guitar.
Yeah.
There was very little information about it at that point.
Did you start re-listening? Because I mean, I do it myself. I listen to a Queen track, and even today I'll listen to Queen songs, and I prefer listening to them through my headphones these days, because you pick out things you didn't
absolutely
hear last time.
Yeah, I mean, we all, I think in those days we all had our vinyl albums up in our bedrooms, and we would sit there for hours and hours and hours listening to them. And it was, an album was a story. An album wasn't just something you put a random track on. You listened to the whole album from start to finish. I feel sorry for kids now because they don't do that. They play random tracks, and you don't get that interesting sort of, the band starts with the theme of each album. You don't have all of that, and you can't. I mean, it is listening to something like Good Company under headphones is a totally different experience to just hearing it in a car on a radio or something. It's a totally different type of. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I grew up in a different era. But I remember, I mean, I was one of those kids. I'd buy there were tape cassettes around, and CDs were just starting to come in when I started listening to music. So my first cassette of Queen was Greatest Hits. But I remember when I started earning money properly and I went out and bought A Day at the Races and A Night at the Opera, and you listen to each song and they blend into the next song, and it takes you on this journey. And you almost have to, every time, I can't listen to it now without listening to the whole thing from start to finish.
Yeah.
I have to listen to the whole album, so I don't often listen, unless I've got the time to sit down and listen to that whole album. I don't tend to just dive into one of those songs, because to me, it doesn't take me back to when that sort of that eureka moment of, wow, this is amazing. I've never heard an album that does this sort of song into the next song, and it's sort of playing with your emotions and how you feel, and then off it goes. It's a real, to me anyway, from what you were saying, it was like a completely ear-opening experience.
Completely, yes, it was. And the other thing I liked about it was that every album, bar maybe A Night at the Opera and Day at the Races, had a totally different feel to it. And you never knew what, a new album was coming out. So the first album that came out when I was a true dedicated Queen fan, where I was obviously The Game. That was the point when I'd really, had definitely decided that it was going to be, that was the band I was going to really sort of follow the most, I suppose. And that was a complete turnaround from anything that I'd heard before from them. And every album from that point on also changed a little. There were different things. So it was something that other bands just didn't do. So that's really what kept me interesting because they surprised me every time, and that was something that I wasn't really expecting from a band. You kind of, these days you still get a lot of criticism, I think, from people saying, well, they didn't do the same as they did last time. But that was one of the whole reasons that I liked them, because they didn't do exactly the same thing. So that was it really. I think it was the fact that they kept changing and kept trying to do new things. I mean, when Hot Space came out, I can't even tell you how much they got slagged off by the press for doing something totally. But I absolutely loved it at the time, because it was completely, again, it was completely different. And you still had all the other albums. You had Jazz, and you had News of the World and Queen 2. So it wasn't like they wiped those away, and it was just something else.
Definitely, and I think that you look at, if you go through all of their albums throughout the years, and you learn and you start to dig deeper into the Brian May story and the Red Special story, and you realise that most artists would have been like, oh, I need a Fender Stratocaster for this album because we're playing a different style.
Yeah.
Or, I need to use a Gibson Les Paul on this, or I need to use an SG, or I need to use a Rickenbacker or an acoustic. And what always amazed me was that realisation that, hang on, apart from like maybe 2 or 3 songs, he's playing that same red chonky guitar he did with his dad, and it sounds different, and it sounds like Brian May, and it sounds like the Red Special, but it's different than it was last time. And then all of a sudden you're like, hang on, he's brought out another style of music now with the same guitar and the same equipment that we all know now what he's using that we wouldn't have known back then, and he's made it sound different again. And that to me is amazing, because it's really hard to be creative with the same tools unless you are truly creative, and then you can use those tools to recreate whatever you want to. And I think that is a mark of a master craftsman.
Oh, absolutely.
Which I think Brian is.
It completely inspired us. We tried to go down the same road. We decided that the 2 of us in the band, there were 3 of us at that time, and 2 of us decided it would be interesting to try and build a guitar. We didn't have the technology or the ability to do it, so we sort of fumbled around. We built an amplifier. We built other bits and pieces. We've managed to construct some electronic drums, right, an electronic a trigger, shall we say, that we would try. The reality was you couldn't actually. We were somewhat further away from being able to do this properly than Brian, it has to be said. Instead of being able to actually hit the pad, I had to actually strike the screw on the side of the box to get it to trigger. There was which was quite difficult, I'll be honest with you, to hit with a drumstick. So yeah, I mean, that whole, build your own guitar, build your own amplifiers, build your own treble boosters, all this sort of stuff, was something that once we started to understand that was what he'd done, we were really keen to try to do something similar. But it was just not something that we didn't have the skill set to do it at that time. And I think when we first realised that Brian had done that, there were no plans available. There was no internet. There were hardly any books. There was an occasional mention in a magazine that Brian had constructed his guitar, and it was a slightly fuzzy shot that you would get. You couldn't really see too much of the detail, so it was completely impossible. But I would walk past guitar shops, and you'd see something from Burns or something from Hofner or something like that had similarities to it, and you'd sort of think, oh gosh, I can remember when I first saw the 84 Guild copy, and I was ready to flog my house to go, and I was literally in a situation at that point where I was supposed to be buying a house, and I think this thing was £2,500 or something, I can't remember. And it was a shop in Birmingham, and my friends literally had to sort of pull me out of this shop because I was ready to just get like 5 credit cards together and try and get this. And I still wish I had, I have to admit, but I never did. I never did. So yeah, it was something that completely you became completely obsessed, and the more you understood about it, and the more you read about Brian, the more I realised. I took interest in all the sort of things he did, from astronomy to animals to everything, all of those sort of things. I realised that the guy as a whole was somebody that I really identified with, and he felt the same about a lot of the things that I do. Yeah. So it was a fantastic journey. Do
you remember the point at which you learned that he'd constructed the guitar that he not only used? I mean, I say this quite a lot to people, and you probably get fed up with me saying this on the podcast, but his guitar is so unique, in one, that he made it with his father, and 2, as an artist, most artists will use something in the studio, and then when they go live, they won't take that same instrument for fear of losing it, or losing that magical mojo. They stick it in a case, and they buy 3 variants of it from Fender or Gibson, or they have them made, and then off they go around the world with those, and they come back, and when they record, they use that instrument.
I don't think I can remember the exact moment that I found out about that. I remember somebody telling me early on that it was constructed. He'd constructed his own instrument, and I think that was fairly soon after I'd seen them in live, and I kind of poo-pooed it. I kind of thought, no, don't be silly. No, that doesn't. Somebody at that sort of level and that status would not have made their. I remember denying it. I can't remember if it was just before or just after we'd gone to see them in '80. But then I started to pick up a little bit more interesting information about it, and I started to try to do some research. But it really was pretty well impossible to do at that point. So you kind of, and frankly, it was hard to even work out what type of a kit Roger had. There was very little information about that. I wanted, as a drummer, I wanted to try to build up this kit, and you couldn't get information on sizes. I knew it was Ludwig, that was about it, and you were guessing. I was looking at the pictures in the back of Live Killers, trying to work out, well, that's got to be at least 15 by 15 or whatever. And the bass drum just looked in normal. And of course, it wasn't. It was only later on you realised that the bloody thing had been made for him in the first place. So it was a special order. Yeah. So you couldn't. That's why you never saw it in the in the high streets.
Yeah, no, it's funny, isn't it? We all go through this where you sort of assume that everything is out there, and then it isn't, and you kind of that realization, and then your own want to create your own journey to attain that thing, to try and replicate or to do it becomes a bit of an obsession, unfortunately, or fortunately, because I would say that this obsession of ours has joined us all together.
Absolutely, more than totally. And I think it's something that you meet a lot of interesting people. You have a lot of interesting discussions, and it's probably something that's given me more pleasure than anything else I can think of really in life. Really having a love of music, a love of a particular band, I've liked everything about them, from the way that they created their music to the way they put on a show, to the type of things they wrote about in their songs. All of that was something that I found absolutely fascinating, and nobody else did it. I like lots of other bands, particularly most of the 70s sort of bands, but none of them really hit the mark with me in the same way. So yeah, absolutely. I'm thankful every day that I've got something that's a healthy interest that I can, it doesn't really help the bank account very much because you end up buying loads of shit. But no, I think it's fantastic. Yeah. I look at my other friends who don't have these sorts of interests. They don't understand why I'm quite as obsessed as I am at all. But I'd far rather be doing this than watching football matches or something. It doesn't. I can't do that. It doesn't.
No, definitely. I think it's. I don't know. It's for me. The story of the guitar, and you hark back to where we are today, or where we are today with the different forums and the big groups of people we get together and the meetups that we've had, and you think that's all stemmed from a father and son back in the early 60s with some scraps of wood deciding, can't afford a guitar, going to build one. How different we all might be if they hadn't done that.
Yeah.
And it's inspired us in all different ways to do different things.
No, totally. I mean, if I had my time over again, I would almost certainly try to focus all energies on going into some sort of music career somewhere down the line, whether it would be on the behind the scenes recording side, because I've always been fascinated about doing that, or whether it would be playing. I don't know. I think I think that there's nothing that gives me quite as much pleasure really as being able to sit on a stage and play and entertain people. I love it in the band. We've been playing together now since 1981, and we don't do a lot of gigs a year, but we do a handful all the way through that time. 99% of the stuff we do is really charitable over the years, so it's usually raising money for some sort of cancer charity or something along those lines. I think I've earned about £200, or as a band we've earned about £200 as in nearly 40 years of playing together.
You're doing well then.
Absolutely, yeah. This is
and if we wanted to find out any more about the band, Jonathan, where and when you might be playing, how would we do that?
Well, we have a Facebook page, and that's Just Kidding. Search Just Kidding on Facebook, you should be able to find it. We don't do a tremendous amount of promotional work because most of the stuff that we do is, as I say, we have a bunch of charities that we kind of support that every year we play. and it's usually around Bucks, around that sort of time, although we have done up and down the country and various different events. But yeah, check out Facebook, justkidding.com. I think you should be there and you should be able to find it.
And Jonathan not only plays the drums, he also wields a couple of red specials when he's playing live.
Indeed.
So if you're a fan of the guitar and you want to hear it in a different
Oh
setting,
yeah.
Certainly recommend checking them out.
Yeah, that was one of the things we do tend to swap around a little bit as a band on instruments and things, and we try to play different things, but I always wanted to be in a situation where I had a scenario where I could actually come out front and play and do a bit of guitar work as well. And so that, because I considered myself a little bit more of just a musician rather than just a drummer, as it were. Because I just thought I'd get that in there. And
you're not going to spontaneously combust today, are you?
So yeah, absolutely. So it takes me like forever to get everything set up, because I'm bringing in amps and I'm bringing lights and I'm bringing a massive bloody drum kit and stuff. So yeah, it takes me forever. But that's what gives me a huge amount of pleasure. Part of it is the collecting and buying the equipment and what have you, and trying to work out how to try to get as close as possible to Brian's sound has been a hugely fascinating and interesting journey, and you learn all the time, and there's every tiny little detail that we all obsess over has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm fairly close now to how he actually sounds. It is really just the fingers now that let me down.
Wouldn't know what you were talking about obsessing over parts.
Absolutely.
Certainly not this group of people that will be listening to this. So going back to you saw the guild and you weren't allowed to buy it at the time. So your own journey with the Red Special itself and acquiring one, how does that come to you ending up with the two Dansans you've got now and the Super?
I originally bought just a cheap Epiphone guitar to learn to play on, and that was fine at the time. It was the nearest thing. It was a round shape that was reddish, and it seemed to sort of look a little bit like the Red Special, so that's the reason I bought that, to learn on. But I couldn't. It was totally out of the question to buy the Guild at the time, and I was just in one of those situations where every time something happened, every time I saw one, and when they released the next version, it was always at a point when I just couldn't afford to buy it at the time. It was, I wanted if there'd been a version that was a few £100, then absolutely I would have snapped it up at that time, or if I'd had the ability to make it, I would have. So I was never in that sort of situation. So every guitar I was buying I'd bought a red Strat, I'd bought a red Telecaster. It was just trying to do something that looked a little bit like it. And then obviously the first one that I was actually able to get hold of was the Burns, and I put my name on the list as soon as I knew that there was going to be a Burns guitar coming out, and I was absolutely, this guitar was just awesome when it arrived finally. I think it's number 80 on the Burns list. I got it in 2001, and it's a lovely guitar. I played it and played it and played it and played it, and then it was a question of trying to work out why I still didn't sound like Brian, and then you start to then realise that actually, probably more of the tone from that guitar is coming from the amp, and that the amp is adding so much that the characteristics of an AC30 makes such a big difference to the tone. I was still carrying around a Fender amp and hoping that was going to sound a bit like it, and I still hadn't really worked out too much about how much of an influence the treble booster had. I knew it was there, but it was one of those things that, again, you didn't really appreciate quite how much of an influence it had. And during that time, there were various other. I remember seeing an RS Customs guitar in Denmark Street, and again that was like £3,500 at the time, and it was just, I was every single penny I had was still going to pay mortgages and all this sort of stuff, and I just had a daughter at that point, and it was impossible. You couldn't do it. If I'd I'd have had to have sold the car to do it, sort of thing. It would have been ridiculous. So again, these things just never quite fell into place, that there was a guitar available that I could afford that was a decent sort of copy. But to be fair, I really think the Burns was a great guitar at its time and a great value. I really do. I think it was a standout instrument of that sort of side. It was for me far closer to what I wanted to sound like than anything else I had or had seen at the time. You couldn't get anywhere near those set of sounds with any other guitar, certainly not with the equipment that was available at the time. So then the long journey started of trying to piece together the whole equipment, really, and buying amplifiers and collecting thousands of treble boosters and things of this nature. And
falling down the rabbit hole, as I like to call it.
Absolutely, yes. I then found out about the plans to do the Super, and again, it seemed a little bit out of my reach at that point. And then you get to a point in life where things just become a little bit easier. You've reached a level in your career where maybe there's a bit more money floating around. You've had a few promotions, you've done well, you've done whatever, hopefully, and you start to become a little bit more comfortable, and you get a little bit more disposable income. And of course, at that point, that was happening with me, but the Super was not being built at that point anymore. So I was then in a situation where I had some money in the bank and I could have gone out and bought one, but there wasn't one to be had. The Guyton guitar at the time that they were starting to do again was fantastic, but again it was that was another huge leap. It was £6,000. So you just get to a point where you could do, what do they do, and then they double the price. So it was always just slightly unattainable.
I'm sure someone was watching your bank account and you can nearly afford
yes,
one. Oh, we'll put the
I think that's literally that was literally what happened, I suspect. So yes, it was I put my name down, I got in touch with BMG and said, I want a Super, and I probably waited at least 3 years, I think it was, if not longer, before eventually I got an email to say, we are looking, are you genuinely interested? And I still waited another probably 15-18 months from that point on, I think, before it actually arrived. And it was one of those awe-inspiring moments when I lifted up and opened the case, and there it was, with the tremolo, everything in place and as it looked. And I remember, and Barry Morehouse actually came and delivered it to my house, which I thought was a nice touch. I was hoping he was going to bring Brian, but but that was quite a nice touch. So he brought that in, and I remember him. You're like a kid in a candy shop. I just wanted to sit and look at this thing.
Yeah.
I didn't even lift it out of the case for about 10 minutes. I just stared at it, and I was offering him a cup of coffee, and we were having a chat, and I think he thought I was a complete lunatic. I think he thought I didn't know how to play it. I think he thought I was just, because he said to me, "You do play in a band, do you?" I said, "Yeah, I play drums and guitar." He said, "You're a drummer. Hang on a minute, you're a drummer." He couldn't quite get his head around it. Anyway, so I wasn't going to sit and try and demo it in front of him. That was just not going to happen. So I just remember resting it on the sofa and taking lots of photographs of it. And he was like, "Well, good, okay, glad you like it." And he sort of walked out of the door slightly sideways, and I think he thought that was some lunatic had bought this guitar. But yeah, it was just, I was completely awe-inspired by this thing, and that coincided with the point when I suddenly found the Red Special Forum. I think I was on Queen Zone and various other, and Queen Online and all this sort of stuff, and I think it was Mike Ride who found me on one of those and said, "Oi, you're interested in guitars, come over and look at this website and see what, have a look and see, there's a bunch of us over here." Because there really wasn't, there were lots of Queen fans, but they were obsessive over stuff that just didn't quite interest me at that time. So then to find that there was a whole group of people that were really obsessed with the guitar was just awesome. Yep. Absolutely awesome.
It's funny because I've been around the forum myself since before the Burns guitars came out, and previously to the Red Special Forum it was on Brian May World Forum, but it kind of got changed and made its way to the Red Special Forum, and for a long time we thought that we, like the core group of us there, we were the only ones. And then you'd start to have people like yourself join, and you're like, "Oh, there's another one," and there's more people interested, and there's even more people coming now that are interested in the same thing we are, from all around the country, all around the world, and I guess it's some kind of validation as well that you're not the only crazy people in the world that obsess over a guitar. But for anyone that hasn't been to the Red Special Forum, it's still around. www.redspecialforum.com, I think is the right thing. If not, I'll put it in the show notes. But well worth heading over if you want to learn any more details about the Red Special, especially some of the specifics. There's some fantastic information over there, as well as a Facebook forum, but based on the same. However, if you want the real detail, I'd say head to the web forum rather than the Facebook forum. Yeah. You arrived, and I remember your handle is Tog. What does Tog stand for?
That actually came out of many years ago. Joining the various forums that were online, and I was this is a guilty pleasure, I suppose, but I was just a very avid Terry Wogan fan at that point. I woke up every morning with him first thing on the radio, and he a lot of his fans were called Togs, Terry's old gits. So that was so I just used that. I couldn't think of when you signed in. I didn't at that point. I thought I'm not going to put my real name in because they're particularly in Queen Zone. There was it was a mire of interesting characters there, so so I thought we'll go incognito in this. So Tog became the name that I used all the way through, and so I joined the Red Special Forum at that point. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I'd seen, I was a fan club member, and so I'd seen the various people that had presented Brian with copies of his guitar that they'd made, and all that sort of stuff. And I think I'd even actually sent an email to Greg Fryer about whether or not he would be making copies saleable to the public, and then I think I got a response back of yes I am, but it's going to be 10 grand or something like that, right? So so that that was the point. Then I became completely rabbit hole obsessed, as you do very quickly when you realise all of the little things that I was really, really pleased with the Super. I thought the Super was fantastic, and then you start noticing and seeing all the little slight elements of it that was just slightly different, and you become and then that opens up Pandora's box, doesn't it, of a complete, where do you go from there? And so that was the point. Then I was very fortunate at the time to just I started talking to Michael Danson, and he was looking at building some guitars, and I was very, very the first few pictures that he sent out, I think, work he was doing, I thought, wow, this is really awesome, and it's if he's going to be doing that at a price that I can afford, that's just fantastic. So that's when I went down that road, really. And I think in his first run I ordered 2 guitars fairly quickly from him, and they are, I've got quite a lot over the years. I've built up a large collection of guitars, but these 2 are hands down my favourites without any question. The red one in particular is it's the guitar I'd always wanted. It is built to the same spec as Brian's. It is done in the same attention to detail. It feels amazing to play. I absolutely love that guitar, and I don't think I will ever find another one that I feel more connected to. It's every single thing about it. I love all of the different. I still love the Burns. I've still got that. I still love the Super, but the 2 Dansons are just that little bit more special for me personally. They're the ones I connect with the most. They feel, because the Super I have is a little bit heavy. It feels a little bit more like a commercially made guitar rather. The thing I like about the Danson is it feels like a handmade guitar. It doesn't have that factory gloss, if you like, that the Super has. I think
all of the high end replicas of the Red Special that are now available, so there's quite a few out there now, which is a fantastic time to become a Red Special fan, or to break into it, because there's so much more information out there, and the guitars are they're pretty spot on. Any of the high-end ones, though, that are built with the same construction methods, similar woods, or same woods, using similar components, there's a certain feel that you get from a traditionally made Red Special with an oak core, with a blockboard body, with a mahogany neck, than you get from a mahogany bodied Burns or a mahogany bodied. Not saying taking anything away from those guitars, because they are fantastic, and the original Super and the second run Super are beautiful, and they're really highly crafted, but there's something about the woods that Brian
Absolutely.
and Harold chose in the original that don't, no, they're not specifically tone woods, and I don't think if you spoke to a luthier and said, oh yeah, oak and mahogany sounds really great with some pine core blockboard around it, they'd be like, who are you? What are you
absolutely.
about, mate?
Yeah.
You need a nice piece of alder or ash, but there's something about it and the way that it was designed and crafted, that when you have a replica that's built faithfully, even if it's just something different about it, and when you plug it into the proper setup, which I know Jonathan has about 1,000 treble boosters and he's got 3 AC30s and all of the bits and pieces you need that we now know about, he certainly gets you in that ballpark. That final few percent is definitely down to you then as an individual rather than the equipment.
Absolutely.
It's a special feeling.
Yes, I mean, I think that's it. My struggle, I think now I have pretty much the same equipment that they use on stage, is to really, really deeply understand how he plays and what shapes he makes with his fingers, what chord shapes he uses, and how he plays, and where he rests his arm, and how he just scrapes the index finger on certain strings. Those little, I really want to try to actually be able to recreate that. And there are some people out there that are absolutely awesome players in our group. I think of people that play phenomenally well, to a level that I will never attain. But it's something that I want to try to. That's the area that I need to try to work on personally, and actually understand all the little intricacies of style that he plays. So that's where I'm sort of focusing. But no, absolutely right. The Danson for me is, you can actually feel it interacting with the amp when you play it, when you're on stage.
Definitely.
And the thing is buzzing. There's a vibration in that guitar that I don't get with other guitars. You feel completely connected to the amplifier. You feel that you are, and it's the nicest experience I think I've had with a guitar at any point, where other guitars you tend to feel a little bit more separated from the amp. I think this one, just for me anyway, somebody else could pick it up and think, no, that just doesn't, I prefer my Stratocaster, but this somehow it just seems to, I know what it's going to do, and I can play it, and I know what it's going to feel like. I don't always get my fingers in the right place, but I know how the guitar is going to react, and it's just, I've got used to it. I play it pretty well every day at some point.
Yeah. I like to think that when, sort of how I try and explain it, if anyone asks me, not that anyone ever really does, but when my friends ask me, why do you like the Red Special? Because when I pick it up, it wants to help you play it.
Yeah.
And because it talks to the equipment, again, how much of this Brian designed and how much of it just got lucky with the treble booster and AC30, but the combination of the three things go together, that you're playing with the guitar, whereas when you plug into a Strat or a Gibson, my own experience is you're having to really wrangle it to get it to do what you want it to do, whereas the Red Special seems to organically just, I don't know, it's difficult. It sounds like mumbo jumbo really, and
no, it really does. I've always struggled, I really liked Strats. I found them easy, the shape of them seemed to fit, and so I found them easier to play. I loved the way a Les Paul looked, but I just found I couldn't play them. I couldn't get the sounds out of it that I wanted, and I think that was a combination of buying a guitar at the time that was maybe the sort of 90s guitars tend to have very, very aggressive pickups in them, and the thing just squealed every time I picked it up. It was just almost uncontrollable. Since then I've bought some custom shop guitars, and they are substantially better. They're much closer to the original, and it's much easier. They're much lighter. They are much easier to manage. But no, it's the guitar I always come back to is one of the 4 Red Specials that I own in some form. It's always one of those. And like I say, I'll still play the Burns quite happily, because it's, if you record them, if you A/B it, there's really very little difference actually. There really isn't. I mean, we obsess about these things to the point where it becomes.
There's definitely a difference, Jonathan. Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about.
But it really, it's the different part from my point of view is that obviously just the neck size changes.
I think I think you're right. I remember when the Burns came out and Brian created that demo on the website, which was, I mean, it was actually, I think it was in a Guitarist magazine CD that you could buy at the time. You get the magazine, and it came with a CD with how to sound like Brian May. And I think Simon Bradley wrote a piece to go with it, and then did some stuff. And you're like, wow, that sounds exactly the same. But for me, the real difference that I found when I bought one of those first Burns as well, and similar journey to you, was like, oh, it's amazing, I've got a red special, but I still don't quite sound right, it doesn't feel how I think it should. And then I think the difference though, is that when you pick the Burns up, because it doesn't interact with the equipment, you don't feel so connected. So when I play, I know I play better when I play my red special that's more faithful than when I play one that isn't, just because the thing feels differently, and that vibration of the body that you get when you strum any chord, even when it's not plugged in, is, I don't know, it seems to make me, maybe whether it's in my head because I know that it's more accurate, or whether it's because I know that it's reacting properly, but when I pick up the more traditional one, I enjoy it more, so I play better.
Absolutely, you do. There's something about it. I don't know what it's very, very interesting. As a band, we are a covers band these days. We stopped writing our own sort of stuff many years ago, and so we just do cover versions, and we play everything from Eagles to, basically if somebody's going to dance to it, we'll play it. So I end up playing all sorts of things in that. I'll play other guitars and other styles, acoustic stuff, all sorts of things. But we always have to throw in some Queen numbers when we do anything live. And I think the best compliment I've ever had was a group of guitarists came up to me after one of the shows we did, and were just absolutely, they've never heard anybody else play Queen and actually sound like Brian. They'd only seen people trying to do Queen songs with a Stratocaster or with a Les Paul. They'd never seen anybody actually with a copy of the Red Special and AC30s and everything, and they were completely blown away with how close it sounded. And it's funny, it's interesting, whenever, one of the best things about when we play is all different age ranges are up. If you do We Will Rock You, you've got 75-year-olds up there doing the thing at the back. We've played people's birthday parties. We did a 70th birthday party for somebody, and the Queen stuff got the most reaction out of anything that we did. We played 50s numbers, we played 60s numbers, but we played Queen. I literally had a row of octogenarians all in front of me doing the We Will Rock You thing. It was hilarious. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing though, because the music touches everyone, doesn't it? And we all have our own stories. I mean, that's partly the reason the podcasts are around, because we've all got our own stories to do with this thing and the guitar and the sound. But it just, everyone is like, I don't know, everyone knows Queen songs, and We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions, Bohemian Rhapsody, a couple others I probably missed, but every generation, no matter who you are. I mean, I work in residential care as my day job, and we play Queen songs to the residents, because whenever I go in and I'm asked to put the stereo on, I always put Queen on. And we've got a lady who's 102 next door. It's her birthday last week, and you're sort of thinking, surely a 102-year-old's not going to be interested, but there's a little smile comes on her face when the Queen stuff comes on the radio. It's great. It's just lovely. And my children, I've got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old going on 21, and the 3-year-old, you stick any Queen music on and she's up dancing, and they know the words, and they know that Brian May's the best guitarist in the world, and he plays the Red Special. So it's very important.
And I don't think the band would have been, without that tone of guitar. I mean, I do genuinely consider that guitar to be another member of the band. I don't think it is so different to anybody else's guitar that Queen would have been a completely different. I can't really imagine them if he'd just gone out and bought himself a Stratocaster or something like that. I don't see how that. I don't know how that would. I'm sure it would have been fine, because Brian's an amazing musician. But somehow that guitar and that combination of equipment, and when you think about how it all came about, how the Deaky amplifier was just, bits lying in a skip. It's kind of, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, it's
you could make a film just about the guitar
Yeah.
and the Brian story, couldn't
Absolutely.
you?
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
because it is the stuff of, it's a proper legend, and there's no other guitarist that I know that built their own guitar either. I think Eddie Van Halen, built the original Frankenstein, but didn't use it forever, and
No.
he only really stuck some bits together, not taking any away from Eddie Van Halen, rest in peace Eddie, but he didn't craft the sides of the guitar and carve the neck and work with it on, and do what Brian and Harold did.
And the interesting thing is, Brian then took influence from Rory Gallagher, and that's where he found that's where he found the AC30s, and that's where he, the treble booster and stuff. But he doesn't sound like Rory Gallagher, even though he was influenced by it. It's a completely different sound. So he was inspired. He said, "This is what I want," but it was only when he plugged his guitar into it that he got his unique sound. And that's really, one of the things that I think is the hardest thing to do as a guitarist is to find your sound. And there's a number of guitarists out there that have a specific sound that you identify with them, and it might be Mark Knopfler or somebody. They've all got their own sort of thing, but there aren't many guitar sounds out there, really, because you buy an amplifier, you buy a guitar, and the generic rock guitar sounds could be almost anybody in a lot of cases. There's a handful of people, and you could count them on one hand, who have such a distinct sound that you always know it's Brian or it's that guitarist.
Yeah. And you're so right, especially with Brian, because you hear anything on the radio if you're listening to it and you don't know that he's worked on a collaboration, and you just like, that's Brian May.
With that, absolutely.
That's, without shadow of a doubt, that's Brian May, because there's only one guitar that makes that sound, and that's Brian May, and it's so distinguishable from every other sound, and it's so, I always, it's a hard sound to describe, but it's such a nice sound as well. Even distorted, it's nice.
Yeah.
From his jangly cleans up to the distorted sound, it's such a nice sounding thing as well. It's not like some players have a distinctive tone, but it's shrill, or it sort of like goes like cheese wire through your brain. Some of the
totally. Some of the guitar, a lot of guitar sounds actually, if you hear them in real life, aren't particularly musical. It's just a distortion. It's just a rock distortion. I mean, you don't see it so much these days, but you'd go into any guitar shop years ago and there would be some kid playing Stairway to Heaven or something like that in the back of the guitar shop, and they always sounded the same. It was always, it was harsh, ear-piercing. It just didn't seem... Brian's guitar never really seems like that. It's always got a warm character to it. It's always got that, even when it's in its most out of phase shrill sound, there's something that it's almost like a voice, isn't it? It's like somebody singing.
It is, and I think it's when he plays rhythm, it's the filler for Queen, especially live mainly. But when he plays a solo or plays a lead part, it's definitely a voice counter to Freddie. Yeah, it's certainly its own thing, and I think you're right. The best way of explaining it is just that the other member of Queen is the Red Special.
Yeah, without question, to me, I think it's probably added more to the band than anything else I can think of. Any of the engineers or anything. The sound of the Red Special is something that you instantly identify with that band almost anywhere around the world. I think people would know, even people who aren't particularly interested in music or Queen, don't follow Queen. Most people can recognise a Queen song and would recognise Brian playing, I think.
Yeah, definitely. But a lot of people don't realise that he built it.
No, I know, which is absolutely, I know. It's all, the whole thing is completely. It was a chain of events that fell together. That it was meant to be, really. And it's, as I say, I'm now 57 and I've spent most of my adult life obsessed with music in some form, creating it, playing it, watching it, listening to it, and the vast majority of that has been Queen related, which is something that I'm eternally grateful for, because I don't really, it's opened my eyes to all sorts of different things, from the technical aspect to learning how to play, to learning about the people themselves and why they wrote songs, and looking at the in-depth why they wrote certain songs and what those songs mean, understanding how to construct a song properly. If you're just taking the lyrics of any of the songs or any of the the chord progressions, now it takes 15 people to write a song, and 99% of the lyrics are repeated over and over and over again. And and that there's nobody. I mean, I think the Beatles touched me a lot in the 60s. If I had to have any kind of a if I was following any band, I suppose, because I was actually alive at the point when the Beatles were releasing singles and stuff, they were groundbreaking at the time, and they didn't write a bad song. It was incredible every time, and so it was that lyrical, flowy musical content that I saw echoed in Queen, and no other band did that. The Beatles song, you'd walk away humming "Love Me Do" or whatever instantly. Even at 6, I'd be doing that. There were songs and I didn't have that experience again until I really understood Queen and got into the Queen albums, because again you'd walk away humming it and listening to it and thinking about it.
So you'd say the Red Special, I mean, because that's what and Queen have inspired your whole life then, Jonathan?
I think actually yes, in many ways, because there's a level of perfection in what they do that I've always thought, well, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well and maybe slightly overdoing. And I think that's,
we've heard that quote from someone.
Absolutely.
Before.
Well, I think it's very it is, if you're going to throw your energies into something, what's the point in doing it if you don't really give it your all? And so I think, I think absolutely, I've been inspired by everything that they do. You have to recognise, obviously, that they are also a business, and so there's a large commercial aspect in everything that they do. But it still comes down to genuine creativity all the time. How they put on a show better than anybody else. Like even now, they're in their 70s, and they're still able to put on a show that's better than anybody else I could think of.
Definitely, it's it's an experience everyone needs to go to before. Obviously we can't at the moment, but it's definitely something I look forward to every time they say they're going touring.
Absolutely,
immediately try and buy tickets. Cause,
there are hardcore fans out there that are sort of against Adam Lambert and this sort of stuff, but for me, I think he's absolutely perfect for them. It gives me the chance to hear live that guitar again that I wouldn't have got.
Yeah. And that's what I love so much about it too, is I get to be in the same vicinity of the guitar and the rig and the chap that made it, and I get to hear that
absolutely
live and hear him do something different on a different night that he's not done before, because he's taking a chance on a solo or he's mixing it up slightly.
The last 2 tours, I've got there super early. I've bought several tickets to see several shows. I've stood in line with everybody from like 9:30 in the morning, and I've just stood in that bloody line waiting to get let in, and then I've got to the very front and I've got to the Brian side. I've stood literally at the barrier, and you can hear the roar from his amps above the PA. The PA is actually almost behind you at that point. The speakers above your head are actually behind you at that point, so you're getting most of his guitar naturally as it is on stage. It is just bloody awesome to stand there and see it. I haven't felt like that since going to see them at Milton Keynes or something. As soon as the first note he plays, it's a cliche, but the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and you just think, and it goes. But then I'm completely focused and obsessed on it, and before you know it, the concert's over, and it's almost like 2 hours has gone past and I haven't even known.
Yeah, no, and trying to be that close is fantastic as well, because you can see what he's doing and see how he makes all the different noises that he makes, not just the ones that he plucks the strings or when he's playing a chord, but all the other noises the guitar and amps make together.
Absolutely.
All the sort of clever tricks he's come up with over the years, using it not just as guitar but as a percussive instrument. And It certainly does. Every time I hear it, it makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
Yeah. And so I'm eternally grateful for the fact that they found Adam Lambert, because I thought after '91 I was never going to see him again. I went to the Freddie tribute concert, and that was amazing, but it was also, again, a hugely emotional day. And I never thought I was going to get to see them again. I really enjoyed the same thing with Paul Rodgers. I really enjoyed all of that. I didn't think he was the best fit, but I was more grateful with the fact that he was out there with them, and I got a chance to see them. So I went to see every tour that they had. I think Adam completely personifies the sort of brand style that Freddie had. He's a different animal. He sings in a slightly different way. I don't really care about that, really. I'm just glad to hear the songs and glad to hear the people who wrote them playing them.
Yeah, it's we're so lucky to be able to see them again, and that's the thing. It's these iconic songs being played by the people that wrote them and enjoying themselves as well.
Yeah.
I think that comes across a lot more. But you got a chance recently, didn't you, to give something back when you gave Simon Bradley, who wrote the Red Special book, some information, I believe.
Yeah, Simon contacted me, and we talked about a number of different things. He was, every so often he would email me with a picture of something and say, can you verify if this is correct? There were various bits and pieces that we worked on which didn't make it into the book. There was going to be a potential of a chapter, I think, about other guitars that Brian had used in videos. So there was, I think Simon sent me a bunch of photographs of different guitars and listed of different videos and said, can you clarify what he used in this and when he used that? So we went through that, but I think then Brian decided that the book should be focused just on the Red Special and not talk about other guitars and things like that had been used. But there was going to be probably a page of all the different other things Brian had used in his career, even if it was just as a prop in the video. Because quite ironically, I couldn't. Well, one of the things that I forgot to mention early on, when Queen released "Play the Game," the video came out with Brian playing a Telecaster, a Stratocaster. That Strat copy was available in the shops at the time, the satellite guitar, and I have one.
Well, you finally got one.
Yes, absolutely. And when I started playing it, I realised why he threw it across the floor, because the thing was more likely to electrocute you than actually make a decent sound. But there you go.
Have you still got it?
I do still have it, but it's in a bit of a sorry state because it died a sad death fairly spectacularly. I mean, it didn't last terribly long. I think it was £60 new. So when it died, I didn't have the knowledge to do anything to bother repairing it. And frankly, if I'd sent it anywhere to repair, it would have cost more than the guitar was worth. So I set fire to it. I left it outside for about, I think it sat outside my house for maybe a month or so in the rain and the snow. And then I bolted it to the wall of my house, and I put a little notice underneath it saying, Buddy Holly's original Stratocaster rescued from the plane wreckage. And there it sat for ages. But the best part about it was I got burgled about a year after it was up on the wall. This guy, while I was out, broke into the house and climbed through the bathroom window and came downstairs, and he cut himself on the window. And there were lots of bloody handprints all over the guitar where he was trying to pull the thing off the wall. The police found this hilariously funny, that some guy had actually read my little plaque and thought genuinely it was a real Stratocaster. So yeah, he never managed to get it off the wall because I'd literally bolted it there like a sort of a Hard Rock Cafe thing, you know. But yeah, so but it's still around. It's up in the loft at the moment, and it's all burnt, and it looks like it's something that Jimi Hendrix has set fire. But yeah, it's still there. You can't really tell it's the same guitar.
You'll have to make it to You'll have to bring it to
I'll bring it to a meetup. Yes, we should string it up and try and get some electricity through it again.
Definitely. No, it'd be nice to see it, just to know that it had been Buddy Holly's original guitar.
People used to arrive at the house and go, "How the hell did you get that?"
I suppose it's. Did the burglar run off with anything else?
He took
all his time trying
he took my video recorder. That was it. Yeah. So
there's a lesson there for anyone that doesn't want them to nick their expensive guitar equipment.
Yes.
Buy a cheap strap, burn it, leave it outside for a month, bolt it to the wall, write a little plaque under it, and your other guitar equipment will be safe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it seemed to work a treat. Really, it seemed to work a treat. I can't remember the police constable's name who came, but we probably spent about 25 minutes just laughing at the fact that this Muppet had spent so long trying to get. I had to repaint the wall because they were literally covered. It was blood all over this thing where he'd been yanking at it, trying to get it off the wall.
You came along to the Red Special Forum a bit later on, so around the Supers coming out, that would have been in the mid-2000s?
2013 my Super was...
Blimey.
Yeah, that was... So I joined the forum in 2013, probably about a couple of months after I got the guitar, something like that.
Yeah. And then you've been an absolute staunch Red Special Forum fan, and... stalwart of making it to all the meetups that have been held.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's great, and I think, like a lot of people, it is about the people. It's about the getting together for the meal and things like that. It's nice to sit and watch all the demos and all that sort of stuff and talk to people about guitars and stuff. But I think also it is the friends that you make that make it important, and that's hearing everybody's different stories of how they got to this point is fun. But yeah, no, I think it's great fun. It's such a shame that this year, obviously, we're under this ridiculous situation with COVID that we can't do it. I'm certainly looking forward to hopefully getting back together again next year and doing it somewhere.
Definitely. So we're still planning to host it as soon as we can, and it's safe to do so. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I know I spoke to you at length over deliberating whether or not to host it again this year, not host it again, whether or not we should postpone it earlier or when we made that decision.
Yeah.
And I spoke to quite a few people, but took some counsel from you on it, and I think it just made sense.
I think it was the right decision not to do it. It would have been, I think we were probably legally obliged not to do it by the time we got to the actual date, didn't it? But
definitely,
and I still don't understand that, to be honest with you. The rules make kind of no sense. You can sit on an aeroplane for 14 hours and fly to wherever, but you can't go. You can't sit in a theatre. You can't watch a show.
No,
it's ridiculous.
It's definitely a challenging year, and I think that's why we thought we'd start a podcast and speak to some of the people that people know and hear everyone's stories, so we can start trying to capture those conversations that I know we have and have had and are likely to have again at other meetups, and some of the information and sort of nice little stories so other people can share in those conversations as well from a distance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully keep the community spirit alive. But I do want to say though, and right now we sort of come to a natural stop, so I'm going to say that one of the campaigns that I've started in the first podcast is that the ultimate goal of the podcast is to get Brian May and the Red Special on the podcast.
Excellent.
So if anyone listening knows of anyone who can help me do that, or Jonathan, if you speaking to anyone that I know along the way, and can mention that you had a fantastic experience on the podcast. You might have to lie, and we can get Brian on. That'd be absolutely fantastic, because I'd love to ask him some of the questions about working with his dad on the guitar and what it means to him to still be able to hold that that piece of his dad in the guitar every time that he plays on stage, and what that must mean to him as he's gotten older, because that must be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's a way of, this knowledge can't be lost. There's so much knowledge in the group of people now, that we probably know more about the history of the guitar and remember more about it than Brian does in many places.
Yep.
And that was the reason, that was, Simon was in that situation when he wrote the book, that he would come and say, well, Brian really doesn't remember what he did here, what he did, how he, because it's a job, it's a job to him. It's a different, for us, it's an obsession. His obsession is creating the music. what bit of kit he uses to use that music is almost, it's not, I won't say it's irrelevant, but once he gets the sound he likes, it's more about
yes.
So we've got all of these things that we're doing at the moment, things like the with the websites and the books and this sort of stuff. This information needs to stay, because at some point in the future other people are going to be looking at this and wanting to know what happened and how it was created.
Definitely. And I thought long and hard for maybe a good 6 or 7 months about sort of my own, I wouldn't say because I host the meetups each year, for those of you that don't know. So in the UK I host the Red Special meetup, and earlier this year I went to Phoenix and went to their first Red Special meetup in the US. But over there I sort of felt like this responsibility on my shoulders to try and curate the knowledge from the meetups, but also the knowledge that we have as a group of individuals, and to put it into something that's concise. And I thought long and hard about how to do that. I've dabbled with YouTube videos, some of which Jonathan's seen some of the test footage, but it's just a lot of hard work to put it together and make it interesting.
Yeah.
And then I thought about making a website and trying to pull everyone's information together, a bit like a wiki thing. And I just thought, that's great, but that's not really my style. So my real thing is around the people in the forum and the community that enjoy this guitar. So if we could have those conversations and record them and then put them up in a place where they're there forever. So if anyone's ever listening and wants to learn a bit more about this stuff, that there's some information there.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be a better way of doing it.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it is something. It's important. In these days, everybody's online all the time, and there's a lot of digital information. There's almost too much digital information out there sometimes. But I think this is somewhere there does need to be a lot of information stored somehow. I mean, I discovered the other day that Queen Zone is about to close down on the 1st of November, and there's a huge amount of rubbish on there, but there's also some interesting stuff, which it would be a huge shame if that disappears, because once it's gone, it's gone, and nobody else is going to go through that.
I think that's my. I wouldn't say I'm worried about it right now, but being a moderator on the Red Special forum and knowing what's on there and where to go to find certain information, my worry is that if we don't support this endeavour as a community about the guitar, that might one day, whoever's in charge of it might not be able to refund it. It might not have such a big following, and we might start to lose those things. And I think for anyone new, or anyone that's finding Queen now for the first time, or anyone that's going to find this and find some videos on YouTube, or find the Facebook forum and then go, actually I'd really love to build a guitar because that's all I've ever wanted to do. I really want to play a Red Special. To be able to then go and find out that you're not alone, and there's a load of people that have actually spent too much of their life probably trying to replicate the guitar in their own workshop or garage, or that have got every bit of kit Brian's ever used. Or
absolutely. And you only have to go onto the forum for 5 minutes, and there's somebody new almost every week that's literally starting that journey and asking those questions about, so does he have the center amp dry, and how does this work? What does the treble booster do? The questions that we all asked all those years ago are still being asked now by people. And one of the nicest things is helping people around the world and helping people piece this together. There's a couple of guys I've been helping recently with various sort of questions. I'm not technically minded at all, but I can point them in the right direction for a number of things. And it's really nice to be able to impart that knowledge and say, this is where you want to go for that, and whatever.
It's things that you get to learn over time that we all know, but it's that information that Jonathan, but that you found out from someone else that you'll pass on. But my worry is if there's ever the break in that chain of passing it on, that if there's a generation gap and then it comes back, we don't want to lose all that info. No. But you're right, helping people, and that's why, to me, the thing is around the people rather than it's obviously about the guitar, but the people that contribute and are part of this thing to me is much more important than sort of, I don't know, I'm rambling there.
No, it is. I think it would be a shame if all of this knowledge disappeared. So I think we need to find every way we can possible to keep it. I'm sure as a group of people we will. I'm certainly don't intend to ever be in a situation where I'm not interested in the band and what they've done and music. So I'm fairly sure that for as long as I can stand up, I shall be involved in some form of musical endeavour somewhere. But we need to make sure that this is saved so future generations can actually sit and listen to it, because they will. We've got Fender guitars collected now and thought of as and Les Pauls, obviously, 70 years ago. People are now sort of working out and trying to understand how the history, how that guitar became so iconic. It will happen in exactly the same way with Queen and Brian May.
And I think since the Bohemian Rhapsody movie came out, there's been an insurgence in numbers in the forum on Facebook. I think it's 3,500 to 4,000 now.
Yeah.
On the Red Special forum, we've got, it did go quiet for a little bit, but we've got good conversation on there again now, and it's definitely brought it back to life for everyone. And the different guitars that are now available as well certainly means it's a lot more. It's easier to find the information. It's a good time to be around, so we need to make the most of it and try and, collate it all properly so that it's there if other people want to find it.
Totally, absolutely, no, totally.
Plus it means I can have a chat with my mates and I've got an excuse to.
Indeed, no, totally. I think so. I think it's one of those things that people will obsess about, just as we have for many years, and if the information is in one place that we can go and look back at, brilliant. That would be fantastic.
Definitely. Right. Well, thank you ever so much for your time today.
You're very welcome.
Or Sir, or Jonathan, which are all the three names that you get called all the time around.
Yeah. I get called a few others, I'm sure, but
yeah. Well. And we've had no dogs eating cake this time.
No, there's a benefit. It's all gone worryingly quiet downstairs, so I'm not too sure what's actually happening down there.
No, it's been great to speak to you today, and thank you so much for your time and your story and some of your bits of information.
No worries. You're welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. An absolutely fantastic lesson and a great insight into your journey with Queen, Brian May, music, the Red Special, and stopping thieves from stealing your gear. And make sure you check out Jonathan's band Just Kidding on Facebook to know when they're playing, post-lockdown, of course. Now, I also want to remind everyone about the Get Brian May and the Red Special on the Red Special Guitar Podcast campaign. So, if any of you out there know Brian, or know someone who can put me in touch with him, or have an idea of how to get hold of him, then please let me know and email me at redspecialpodcast@gmail.com. So this is the part of the podcast where we listen to your feedback. So far, the feedback that I've received has been positive, and everyone has told me that they've enjoyed the podcast. But please do let me know if there's anything missing, anything you'd like to hear, or anyone that you think I should be talking to in another episode. Now, with that all in mind, and having listened to me now for some 1 hour and 17 minutes, it's probably a good place to end the podcast. I'm not going to be adding any technical data this week, just because it's a long podcast, and I actually think for that stuff, it's probably best to go and check out the information at the redspecialforum.com, or head over to the Facebook page and start asking some questions. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I certainly did. And keep safe, and I'll catch you in the next one.